Welcome to the US AVD User Group YouTube channel. Coming up is the recording from a live online user group meeting. Please use the link below to become a member of the community and join us for our free monthly events. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get started. Okay, there we go. Welcome everybody. Let's try this again to the December US AVD User Group. As I was saying, this meeting is recorded. If you have any questions, then you don't want to be recorded, I will stop the recording at the end and give you an opportunity to ask those questions. So today we're going to start out with some AVD updates, and then Aresh Sakari is going to talk about deploying Azure Virtual Desktop with Terraform. So we're excited about that one. That's a great topic. There is no sponsor for this meeting. Just member expectations, treat everyone with respect, be involved. Please share those notifications as I send them out. Share the group and please join. I know firsthand that people aren't always able to make these when they RSVPs, but I do appreciate it if you make a good effort in trying to attend. And again, if you want to stand out, present, be part of it. Even if you have something short, we'll accommodate. So if there's anything you want to share with the group, please do. Just let me know. Okay, so there's a new AVD client update, like every month. Mostly bug fixes and issue fixes with this one. So there's a link to add troubleshooting docs, or link added to troubleshooting docs. There's it fixed an issue with resizing the windows during Teams video calls. Fixed an issue with loading more. That's supposed to be more with an E than 255 workspaces, and improve some logging and diagnostics. There's a new app attach feature for Windows Virtual Desktop. So there's some new stuff out there on app attach, which is exciting. We can assign applications to any host pool or individual session hosts. We can assign applications per user, both within a desktop session or remote app. Assign applications using the application itself. So we don't need application groups to assign out those applications. Microsoft Enter ID support with app attach, and once I get out of this window, I can post these links into the chat as well. And then the next one is there's a personal desktop auto scale on Azure Virtual Desktop is generally available. So this has been in public preview for a while, but now the auto scale for personal desktops is GA. And that uses Start on Connect for those personal desktops. Any questions around there? Let's see here. I'm working off a limited number of monitors here, so there we go. All right. With that, I'll hand it off to Aresh to get started with virtual desktop, or deploying virtual desktop with Terraform.
Sure.
Stop presenting. Thanks.
Thanks, Travis. I'm just gonna, let's see first what you guys are seeing, okay? Let me know, because I'm using this new monitor and I am just not sure.
I'm seeing your PowerPoint. I'm seeing the PowerPoint application, so okay, with the slides on the left.
Awesome. What are you seeing now?
Now I'm seeing you have a large bar, that's the entire window, so you must have an ultra wide.
Yes.
Yep. I can still read it, so if you want to go with that, I think it won't be too bad.
Is this all right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Sounds like a good plan. Let's kick it off then.
All right.
Okay, thanks everyone for joining. It's a big crowd, a big community crowd that I'm seeing versus what we do locally. We off and on get so many people, but glad to see that you all could make it at 5 p.m. on Thursday or a Friday. For me, it's a Friday. I believe it's Thursday for you guys. I'm based out of Sydney, Australia. I'm a senior solutions architect at Dell Technologies. I'm a Microsoft MVP and a VMware expert. I'm a first-time Microsoft MVP, and probably eight or 9 times, I've forgotten the count, of the VMware expert. I've been in the VDI industry for quite some time, so definitely I have a lot of background, and I'll try to bring that experience in when I'm talking about things. So that's a quick intro about me. Let's see what we are going to cover today. We are going to see what is Azure Virtual Desktop and its architecture quickly, and then we're going to go and see when to use the million-dollar question, when to use AVD versus Windows 365 Cloud PC. So we're going to take a look at the decision matrix. Then we'll see what are the advantages of deploying Azure Virtual Desktop through infrastructure as a code. Then look into deep dive into Terraform and how to set up it. And then if the demo gods are with us, we will be deploying the Azure Virtual Desktop remote app live from the VS Code, provided, fingers crossed, and demo gods with us, okay? And wrap it up with questions. We'll try to take all the questions towards the end, or feel free to drop it in the section down below. Are you still able to see the slides and everything, right?
Yes.
Awesome. Sorry, just checking. So what is Azure Virtual Desktop? Before I go into Azure Virtual Desktop, can I see a show of hands of people who worked with some other solution than Azure Virtual Desktop? Wow. Quite a bit. Not bad, not bad. That's great. So if you compare a solution that you want to do for virtual desktops, essentially you need to start thinking about broker, gateways, and all the other fun certificates and everything that comes along with it. Now, what Azure Virtual Desktop does is it's a virtual desktop and an application virtualization solution where all the heavy lifting around the broker, web access, and the gateway, and the REST API, all of that particular architectures are simplified by Microsoft and managed and maintained by them. So what I mean by that is that instead of you traditionally on a different solution, you were responsible for deploying those kind of solutions. In such scenario, Microsoft is doing the heavy lifting, and it's giving you all those particular services extrapolated within the in the blade for Azure Virtual Desktop. So you as admins or you as consultants don't have to manage, maintain, lifecycle the solution. It can be doggedly classified as DaaS. It can be because other competitors also have equivalent solutions which do exactly identical, something like Citrix Cloud as well as VMware Horizon Cloud. They all do similar kind of extrapolation where they build the broker, the gateway, and host it in the cloud, and they do the life cycling. And all you have to do is focus on images, the desktop, and the application delivery to your user base. So something identical is what is called as Azure Virtual Desktop. And remember, that's managed, maintained by Microsoft. From your perspective, if you as an admin were to do the Azure Virtual Desktop, you need to focus on the image, as I said. So you would be required to create the image, maintain the image if required, and essentially install applications within the image for either the desktop or the application delivery. Note in Azure Virtual Desktop, if you're doing compared to other solutions, which we are going to look at and compare with the billion-dollar question around Windows 365, it's a bit more touchy. Essentially, you have to know a network. As you can see already on the architecture diagram, there's a lot of networking components involved. You would be worried about subnets, the firewalls, and all the other good things that come along. So you have to understand Azure, and you will be responsible for managing and maintaining those host pools. So it could be, depending on your requirements, it could be anywhere between one being minimum and maximum, whatever host pools, depending on how many people you're serving in your organizations. There would be storage requirements for saving all your FS Logix container or shares or anything that you're delivering along with the desktops. So all of that it needs to be taken into account. And all emphasis that I want to give out here is that, remember, you need to know other Azure services which are leveraged within the Azure Virtual Desktop. However, the core services is managed and maintained by Microsoft for you on your behalf. And when we go into the deep dive, we'll take a look at the portal and everything. So moving on, let's have another show of hands. How many of you have used Windows 365 Cloud PC? Wow, nice. Excellent. So fair bit, again, a fair bit of people have used the Windows 365 Cloud PC. And essentially, why I thought of discussing this as importance in an Azure Virtual Desktop session is that essentially Microsoft has taken a further step ahead than after launching Azure Virtual. So Azure Virtual Desktop was the first product that got launched. Further, in the years after the launch, Microsoft has further launched Windows 365, which is essentially a desktop as a service where they even extrapolate all the options around host pool. Let's say if we were to talk in context of Azure Virtual Desktop, they even elevate the host pool creation, the workspace creation, the application gateway creation. All of that is extrapolated out, and you as a user or you as an enterprise, all you get is a desktop straight out once you do the provisioning. So essentially, it's a furthermore streamlined and extrapolated version of your cloud desktop in the cloud. So essentially, a lot of people get confused as to why would you use that versus when would you use Azure Virtual Desktop. And essentially what I wanted to highlight is that Azure Virtual Desktop is something which gives you the flexibility to control bits and bobs of each and every aspect of your desktop and application virtualization journey. And essentially the other components such as, or other software such as Windows 365, it is pretty limited in terms of what you can do or what you can configure or what you can limit the desktop experience to be, because there's no customization. When I mean by no customization, it means there's no customization to the degree of what Azure Virtual Desktop can do. And hence, if you want a lot of customizations, if you want to do a lot of you want to control all the bits and bobs of the protocol, of all the settings and the configuration, then Azure Virtual Desktop is the way to go. Plus a lot of hybrid scenarios where, imagine if you wanted to run the desktops on premise. So essentially, let's say you wanted to use the control plane of Microsoft. However, the workload domain or the workload domain or the desktops or the apps, you wanted to run them on premise. So you can very well do that with Azure Virtual Desktop using Azure Stack HCI and Dell Apex nodes. You could build that particular cluster on your premise and essentially run the desktops and the apps from in-house, and the broker and the gateway component that are provided by Microsoft they can still live in Azure portal. So you get the hybrid flexibility. Plus, a lot of customization options. You can literally turn features on, off, do USB redirection. You don't do USB. Same like the emphasis. What I want to do is that you can do a lot of customizations. If anyone out here who's done or performed VDI admin roles, they love to do all the tweaks and all the bits and bobs on configuration. Very much narrowed to that particular environment and not ready to take on the general defaults that can come with out-of-the-box solutions. So essentially, it's your choice now. Which way would you like to go? Well, now, the way I typically recommend is that what kind of resource structure you have within your organizations. If you have the techos, if you have the resources to go and do a great user experience with a customized user experience for each and every business unit, then go down the route of Azure Virtual Desktop. However, if you want an out-of-the-box experience and you don't have the resources, then please go down the path of Windows 365, because turning it on, getting onto your cloud PC desktop is much simpler. Now, there's another method. There's another approach that I've seen, and I've seen this locally at a very large customer over here in Australia as well, is a combo of both. So just the backstory of why the combo of both is that the customer was already in Intune. So all the Windows 365 bits are in Intune, and you manage it through Intune. So essentially, the customer was using Intune for better part of the entire physical desktop management. So when Windows 365 was an additional cloud PC which was launched, for them it was just like a natural progression of doing Windows 365, because it was straightforward, monthly dedicated costs, versus in Azure Virtual Desktop, it's pay as you go. So depending on how much of scaling plans or how much of power optimization you are doing on your host pool is where you will get your run rate on return of investment. Versus in Windows 365, it's like a steady monthly cost. You exactly know how much you're going to pay, no matter whether you use it for 1 hour, 2 hours, or 20 hours, or whatever hours in that month. You are paying just the fixed cost. So for that particular customer, it was like a no-brainer that they were used to you Intune, and they did not want to embark an entire journey of learning Azure Virtual Desktop and doing a desktop delivery from Azure Virtual Desktop. So what they end up doing is they did Windows 365 for the desktop bits. However, they got, let's say, desktop delivery is done and dusted. But what about application delivery? They also had standalone 300 published apps that they were also consuming on its own. So there's no solution that right now within Intune and Windows 365 that can do apps. Who knows what's year to come in the future, but at this point in time, it doesn't exist. So this particular customer, interestingly, did Windows 365 for the desktops, and for all the 300 plus remote apps, they started using Azure Virtual Desktop Remote App. So essentially, the takeaway from here is that you could have mix and match as well. It just depends on what your business model or your IT skills and experience in your organization is. And depending on that, you could probably make a choice. Being a nerd myself and being in the VDI industry for long, I would love the customization and going down the route of Azure Virtual Desktop. However, from the simplicity standpoint, I'm blown away how easy Windows 365 Desktop can be for a lot of organizations who have lack of IT skills as well. Moving on, what is the advantage of doing Azure Virtual Desktop deployment using Terraform? So before we get into that, let's explain what's the landscape right now. So if you were to do today the deployment, you first need to create the host pools and the workspace and the remote application groups. So you had to do all of that. Now, I'm not saying that this particular task at this point in time is hard, even through the UI, and we'll take a look at that. It's not that hard, but why would you like to do this through infrastructure code is essentially around reasons where if you wanted standardization and repeatability over and over again, and you want a consistent experience of configuration and monitoring the configuration drift, if any, in a seamless manner, then you should be using Terraform. Plus, another big key advantage is that, let's say you deployed your whole entire Azure Virtual Desktop in a particular region. Now, it's rare, but let's hypothetically imagine that entire region went down. Now, you as an admin and a consultant were required to stand up an entire parallel environment in the other region. Imagine doing all of that if you had done the entire configuration through the UI and you were to stand all of that up in the other side, how long that would have taken. And imagine if you would have used infrastructure as a code, and then if you were to deploy that particular host pool on in the other region, how quick. And we'll take a look at how quick it will be deployed using Terraform as well. So essentially, there is repeatability, and you get to control the versioning of the configurations and parameters. A unique thing which I like about deploying it to Terraform is you can catch the configuration drifts. So what I mean by that is, let's say you have 10 people admin team managing your big enterprise infrastructure in AVD. Now, let's say one of the admins went in and changed the configuration from one of the boxes where is it a test VM test validation mode, and there's a radio button yes and no. Let's say hypothetically it was always no and he made it yes. Now you could from the audit logs catch what the configuration drift is and who did it, but imagine using Terraform, you can, in a matter of fact, say, oh, my desired state was this, which is no, and someone has made it yes, and you can catch that particular delta drift when it happens. Hence, it is essentially important that out doing a large-scale deployment, and I'm putting the emphasis on large out here. Medium to large is what I would put the emphasis on. You should consider either deploying it through Terraform or Bicep. Now, depending on which language you are most comfortable with, you go with that. Now, the advantage with Terraform is that it can be deployed across multiple clouds. Obviously, this context is not that true for Azure Virtual Desktop because it's a very Azure-oriented service. But the beauty about Terraform in general is that you have different providers for different clouds, and then you have that same experience and you can reuse the config files across different clouds if at all required. However, if you did it through Bicep, then Bicep is only applicable for Azure only. So these are certain advantages around using Terraform and deploying Azure Virtual Desktops. Now, Arash, a quick question. Mate, I just have one host pool. Should I be deploying it through Terraform? The answer is depends. If you are the nerdy kind of a person who would love to even deploy your one host pool with Terraform, go for it. But I've seen most of the folks in the industry, when it's a very limited setup, they go through the UI and just configure it because they don't want the hassle for doing all the configuration. Now, note, in my experience, the debatable topic is that when you're doing the deployment of Azure Virtual Desktop to Terraform, the first time deployment takes a hell lot of longer than going into the UI and deploying it with next, and just putting in the default configuration and going with it. Now, the reason being is that it's a one-time effort. Once you've narrowed down and built all the particular files, which we are going to look under Terraform, then it becomes repeatable. And that's the beauty around spending that extra effort and extra time for the first time, and then reaping the benefits by leveraging the configuration done once over and over again. So we'll take a look at all of those particular details of different files and structures within the Terraform. So this is, in a nutshell, the advantages of using Terraform. So how do we get started? To get started, all you need is your choice of your machine, whichever machine you use. You have Terraform available for everything. In my case, and for today's demo, it's going to be Windows laptop. So all you do is go onto this particular link to download Terraform, or just type it in Google, download Terraform, and you will be presented with this version of this exe for Windows. Hit download, it'll give you the zip file, extract the zip file, create a folder of your choice wherever. So in this example, I've created in C Terraform, and put the particular extracted files that you've got from the Terraform site into the location. In this case, I've just put the extracted file, which is nothing but a terraform.exe, into the box and move on. The next step after we put the exe is to set up the environmental variable. All you do is go into system. If you're, this is, remember, as I said, this is for Windows. I'm talking about the steps for Windows, but they won't be any drastically different for other operating systems. All it would be is like the look and feel, and how you would execute those steps would be a little different. So you go into the system properties, advanced, environmental variables, and just put the whole path of the exe that you've downloaded. After you put in this path, that's when on the command line, when you type in Terraform, it's going to start detecting the Terraform command, and it's going to give you all the switches and everything along with it. So once you've done the environmental variable, you're almost there. Now, a very important aspect that I wanted to go through is how would you put the code in, and how would you go about storing the code, or how would you go about the folder structure for whatever you're deploying. In my case, and there's literally no right or wrong way, so doesn't mean what I'm showing is the only way of doing it. There are various ways to achieve the same results. But let's say in my case, I have within documents, I have a folder called as Terracode. Within that, whatever I'm deploying, I have individual folders for them. So if I'm deploying a remote app, I have a remote app folder. If I'm doing a personal desktop, I have that particular folder. And if I'm doing a pool, dedicated. So in short, in a nutshell, what I'm saying is I have a dedicated folder for each host pools that I'm doing. And for the scaling plan, I have a dedicated folder as well. And there's no right or wrong way, but I'm just saying that this is how I've done it. Now, within the folder, what's there inside? Mainly, the whole configuration is done through 4 main files. They are main, providers, variables, and output. And we'll take a look at each of these files shortly. But I just wanted to highlight the folder structure of how we're doing it. Now, before we get started, so we're almost done on the endpoint side. That is the configurations that were required on the laptop to kickstart. However, the important aspect out here is that before you could start doing the deployment in Azure portal, you need a couple of things ready in the Azure portal. And we will take a look in the demo as well. But first, let me explain it out here, and then it'll be much easier to take a look later in the portal, Azure portal. You need to create an Entra ID application, which allows you to do all the creation and the execution with the right roles. In my case, I've given it slightly more elevated role. I think I've given it cloud admin or something on those lines, and we'll take a look at it. But just follow the right role assignment or what you're going to use the application ID for. And depending on that, only two things are very important. What is the role assignment? What rights does it have in Azure portal to do all the execution? And hence, in my case, as I said, I've given this cloud admin or something. We'll take a look at what exactly that particular role is and essentially create an application registration in Azure portal. In my case, I've called it as Terraform. What this essentially would give you is an application ID and a secret, which you can leverage. So just imagine that as your username and a password with the right access to do the creation and the deletion and configuration within Azure. So that's what we're going to do. The way I do it is there are multiple, again, there's multiple ways to do this execution. The way I do it is I just create the environmental variables of client ID, secret, tenant, and subscription on my PC. And essentially, I've just masked the values out here, but I've copied, and we'll take a look in the Azure portal. I've copied and put the values in. Once you have these environmental variables, essentially it allows you to run the code from VS Code. That is the IDE of your choice, the editor of your choice. And essentially, again, you could use any editor of your choice. Doesn't have to be VS Code. But just giving you an idea that the prerequisite, we finished all the prerequisite on the client side. The next is we needed an application to do all the execution within the Azure portal. And essentially, we create this app registration. And once we create is when we get all the values and the GUIDs up, which we'll be copying and pasting in the environmental variables on the PC. What's the typical Terraform workflow? Essentially, there is like four main commands is what I typically end up using day in, day out. And essentially, the first one being initialization. And initialization is nothing but all it's doing is making sure it can read the exe. It has downloaded the provider, the Azure provider. And if there was any upgrade or upgrade required for the provider, it will go and fetch the upgrade. And we'll take a look at that. Validate. I don't use validate that much personally, but validate is something that it will check all the syntaxes and everything, whether they are consistent and ready to go. I should be using validate, but I don't use validate. It's like a proactive check of whether your configuration files and everything is following all the right structure and their syntax-wise correct. After you've done the initialization, what you're doing is planning. So from your config files that you have, you've laid out the execution of the plan. That is what you want it to do. That is, if you want it to create a host pool, you're telling it to create a host pool. If you want it to create a resource group, you're telling all those particular details of what you want to create in a file called as main.tf, and we'll take a look at that particular file shortly. Once you put all of those particular aspects of what you want to create in the main, all the variables that you will be calling in the main needs to sit in the variable file. And we'll again take a look at that variable file. So essentially, based on these two files, you're creating a plan. And when you hit the plan command and you write the Terraform plan and whatever the file name and hit enter, it essentially goes and tries to do a a check whether all of these creations, such as the resource group, the host pools, can be validated against in the portal. And it'll show you, yes, I can do this, and it'll mark it whether I can create this resource group in green. It will not execute it. Remember, this is just the planning phase. So it's just letting us know that, yes, it can go ahead and do the resource group creation, the host pool creation, the workspace creation, and create all the different types of settings within the host pool using that. And it will just give you a plan in place. After that, if you see the output and it falls that, yep, I can see that it is doing the right naming convention, it is creating this, and you're happy with it, or now you can go ahead and click on apply. When you click on apply is then when it starts doing the creation of the resource groups, the host pools, the VNets, and everything associated to your configuration, and it'll start doing the deployment. And after it finishes, then you can go and jump into the Azure portal, and you will see all the resources that were required for that host pool creation is done and ready. Last is the destroy. Destroy is something where, let's say you did the deployment and you plan to go ahead and delete that host pool completely. Now, all you could do is programmatically go in and click on select Terraform destroy and give it a name, and you will be able to destroy the newly deployed host pool from your configuration. Now, the thing which I said earlier around the configuration drift, right? Let's say you did the apply and some of your admin went in and changed that particular validation from no to yes. What you could do is you could come back and rerun the plan. When you will run the plan has your desired style. So essentially, it will go and check, okay, I'm checking against this, and I can see that there is a delta drift between the configuration that you had in your file, which was no, and someone has done it yes. So that's how you catch the delta drifts using the plan when you rerun it again. So this is in a nutshell the entire flow of the Terraform workflow. As I said, I mainly use the 4 initialization, plan, apply, destroy. I don't use validate that much, but definitely you guys should put it in your practice to use it. Now let's see. Oh, lovely. It is now demo time finally. So let me stop sharing this. And first things first, let's go in and look at the Azure portal. Oh, wow. Okay, let me know if you're able to see my Azure portal.
The portal showing.
Awesome. So before I go into Azure Virtual Desktop, let's quickly go into the application registration that I've created for Terraform and doing all the execution in there. So you go ahead, come here, click new registration, very straightforward. Even if you leave the defaults, it's done. Once you have it, the important aspect is the permission and the role. I think I've given Cloud Application Administrator, and once you assign the permission out here and done, is 2 things you need to copy out of this. One is the application ID, and the next is the secret. And once you have that, it allows you, and there's few other details around the tenant ID. You need the tenant ID and the subscription. So once you've done that, you have that particular block of 5 environmental variables. You can go ahead and hard code that onto your endpoint. I don't usually hard code. I've stored it and I reuse it again and again whenever I'm executing, just by entering those 5 lines, hitting enter, and that's how I'm able to execute my code after that. Moving on into Azure Virtual Desktop, this is your blade. For me, it's already in there. If it's not in your blade, just type in Azure Virtual Desktop. You'll get the Azure Virtual Desktop, and that now you're into the Azure Virtual Desktop blade. Now, remember in the architecture, what I was telling you earlier, that in any VDI solution, ideally there is a broker, gateway, web access, and API access. And those particular components are hosted somewhere, which magically we can't see, but they are hosted somewhere in the backend, which Microsoft manages. And we as consumers, admins, consultants, architects, get this particular portal where you can start doing the configuration. As I said, for any configuration, you need to create a host pool, application group, workspace, and that's the reason when you have to do such an activity. And imagine if you were a large, medium, or medium to large enterprise where you were to deploy 10 host pools and multiple application groups and few workspaces. The amount of work you have to do through the portal is intense. And that's the sole reason Terraform deployment using infrastructure as a code comes into the picture, where you need to put the effort once to create the files and the structure, and then you can quickly leverage it. As mentioned earlier, this is how you create it in the UI. It's not that trivial even in the UI, but as I said, you need to be consistent. People would do typos on the naming. People might just select different settings on different pools. Hence, there might be a configuration drift or inconsistency between your host pools between A and B, and you don't want all of that. And if you want a consistent experience of creating the host pool, then this particular, rather than doing it through the UI, you can do it in the Terraform. Now let's jump in and take a look at the VS Code. My choice of the code editor is VS Code. It doesn't have to be your choice, but trust me, for anything in Azure, especially, VS Code is magical, and it does a lot of heavy lifting. Like I said earlier, look at my folder structure. I have this folder in C documents, VS Code, Terraform as another folder. And within that, I have this folder structure for everything that I've deployed in the past. In this case, we are going to deploy a remote app. Is there any personal preference from anyone? Should I do remote app, or do you want to see personal desktop or pool desktop? Anyone has any preference?
Remote app.
Remote app, then it is. That's what I intended. Lovely. So one may ask, hey, Resh, you said 4 files. How come I'm seeing other files in your folder? Just because I've done the creation of the plan, I've done deployment, I've applied that plan, and I've also destroyed it. So each exercise that I've done has caused additional files in the folder. However, from a folder structure, now if you were to put this repository into GitHub, then you might not want to put these files in, or you might want to put these files in and not the environmental variables, because that's like storing your passwords and you don't want that to be captured in Git. So essentially you can have exclusions of what you put in GitHub versus not. Mainly it's 4 files: main, output, providers, variables. Let's start with the providers. The structure of JSON that you're saying, or Terraform file that you're seeing, all Terraform files end with the TF extension. what you see as a block of code is nothing but straight out from the Terraform's HashiCorp's website. Essentially, it's invoking the Azure Resource Manager provider, and it's also referring to the version of the exe that is using for the Azure Resource Manager. And that's the reason when you run the first command of this particular exercise of the workflow, which is Terraform init upgrade, it's just init. I also add hyphen upgrade. What it essentially does is that if I'm running an older version, it will go ahead and bring in the new version as well. So once you do the initialization, as you can see in the initialization, it's gone ahead and done the installation of Azure AD. Now, Azure AD, if you look at the documentation just standalone of Terraform Azure Resource Manager, it does not include Azure AD in the block. However, I have added Azure AD in the block because remember, all the Microsoft Entra authentication and everything that you're doing versus also needing to add user groups to the application groups that you create, and all the provisioning part of assigning the users or assigning the groups to the application groups, that's carried out through Azure AD. Hence, you have to include Azure AD as well during the initialization. I learned it a little hard way because I was doing the deployment and it was doing the deployment, but it never was doing the assignment of a group, an Azure AD group into the application group. And I was like, well, why is it not happening? And then later on, following the documentation, following other things, realized that, yep, Azure AD is also required. Hence, I've just highlighted that particular block as a requirement. So this is your provider file. Now, provider file is no-brainer. That's about it. If you were doing other things in Azure, depending on the other things that you were doing, you would add those particular providers in here. But in our case, it's just Azure Virtual Desktop and Azure AD. So these are the only two things in our files. Next, I would emphasize on the variable file. Now, what is the variable file? Like any PowerShell coding or any coding that you do, you will be passing on variables. Now, the differentiation out here is that I've seen a lot of blogs, a lot of YouTubes where people don't use the variable file and everything is either hard coded or entered directly into the main file. I don't think that's a great idea. I think there is a place for the variable file where you put in all the variables that you're going to call for the creation and leverage in the code. And essentially, as I said, this also helps you for reusing the files. If you're using the variable file and everything is not hard coded into the main, you can start reusing the code. So when I started my journey, I actually started with personal. I don't remember, it was multiple years back, so I don't remember very well which was my first folder. But what I'm trying to say is that I created that first, and then I could literally leverage the providers. I could literally leverage the variables. I could literally leverage the main, a bit of all the code that was there. I'm not saying 100% you'll have to add, depending on what you're configuring, additional into the code, but into the files. But you could start leveraging, if you follow the structure, you can leverage the files again and again. So the variable file is a place where whatever you would like to use and name the deployment, you need to declare it here. Now, what should you do in generalization of naming? I suggest there are great tools. Just type in Azure naming standards, and I think someone has written a blog post. I'll make sure I post it in the chat after the session. But there's like a naming tool. All you do is make sure whatever you're using, you have a naming convention in place. Now, the way I've done it is just for a thought process, I'm giving you this. You would have to use this naming, but I'm just giving you an idea how I'm doing it. So the way I'm doing is the first two letters is Australia East. The next three letters after the hyphen are what kind of environment it is, dev. What is it? Azure Virtual Desktop, the resource. 01 is just like the pod one kind of a scenario where it's the first in line. Pooled, PO, A and RG is the resource group. So essentially, this is how I have broken down. So just at a snip of looking at what the resource is, I can identify it's an app. It's for a remote app. And I can easily say, this is the resource group, and this is in Australia East. So I would highly recommend creating a naming standard during your design phase and making sure whatever you're deploying is in the is via a good naming convention. Now, what am I declaring in the variable file? The first block is nothing but the location. Like even if you were to do it in the portal, right? When I said you could do it in the portal when you're creating a resource group, it is going to ask you the subscription, and it's going to ask you which region you want to deploy it. So essentially, you're just letting it know which region are you going to deploy. In my case, it's Australia East. What is the resource name where you're going to deploy this? And I've given it a resource name. What is the workspace? You could use an existing or create a new workspace. I've put in the name of the workspace that I want to use. The host pool of what is going to be the host pool called, what it's deploying. Similarly, I've done the appending of the HP being host pool at the end. What is the app group name I'm going to use? Put in the app group name. And I've also put in the descriptions. Make sure you, that's why I said, spend the time one time. Put in all the details in the right way. Don't cut corners around when you're creating these particular Terraform files. Don't cut corners around not putting in enough data. Make sure anyone reading it on GitHub will be able to comprehend as well, and matching it up to the design that, hang on, my design says the naming standard is this. That's the reason I'm using all of this with this particular naming convention in the code. The most important thing is when you're deploying, there's a concept called as app registration. Now, good part is that, as I said, God be with us during this demo. And I've noticed time and time again that if you do not change this, I'm guaranteed to see an error around app registration. So app registrations is nothing but it's going into the host pool and it's allowing you to create it. And essentially, instead of doing it through the UI, you're able to do it out here inside Terraform. Now, what I want to do out here is, because this is old, you can say when was the last time I might have done a remote app deployment. So let's make it 12. I think today is maybe 25, yeah, till Christmas, let's say. So I've just randomly put in the token. You can, I'll show this particular aspect even in the UI. So this this token is required for doing the creation. The next is the prefix. What prefix I want to give to the host pools. I've given that, and I've put in the naming standard again. So I've done the -. and then it'll start doing it numbering 0102. So there's a prefix. And the last but the least, and again, a lot of people I've noticed all along in many content that I've seen is they never show you using how to do it in production style using tags. And why tags are important? Tags are extremely important. You doing all sorts of future automation onto those particular host pools. If you put the right tags and if you build using right tags, it will allow you to do a lot of day to ops happily using tags and automation. So also it helps you during billing. If you've done the right tags, you can do drill down of your cost using those particular tags in the future. So I highly recommend usage of tags into this. So this particular block of code is just accommodating all the tags, and you'll see it will create these 5 tags: environment being dev, department IT, location Australia East, service class dev. And if I'm not from memory, if I'm not mistaken, the one for billing is called as CRM-resource. If you use that tag, it helps you during the billing exercise later on. So I don't have it right now, but I'm just giving you heads up that it would be worth adding that resource CRM-resource from memory is what I can remember to this, and it helps you during the billing exercise. And what Azure AD group I'm assigning this particular application group. So I've put in the group name. It's called as Win365-users. So I've just added that. That's an additional code. When you're doing assignments, you need that. So this part came in much later in my journey. Essentially, first I was just doing the deployments. Then the next step kick in, and how would I do the assignments? So this particular block is just looking at the assignments. So now that we've entered all the variables in the variable file, let's move on to the main, where now you're telling or you're asking Terraform, what am I going to do or what am I going to deploy? A slight differentiator to a lot of things that I've found again, and versus what the way I've done it is, I'm leveraging that. Suppose there are bifurcation in the teams, right? Though you might be the Azure Virtual Desktop team, but need not necessary in most of the organization, you are the networking team as well. And what I meant by that is that whether you are the one who can do the subnet creation, you are the one who can create the VNet, maybe you are not. And for that particular aspect, there's someone else. So what I'm doing out here is I am making a point to leverage existing resources in the code rather than need not necessary that I have the God mode powers and I do end-to-end deployment. That's being very lucky if you have that kind of a model where you are in charge of deploying everything of your destiny. That means it's a great model to have. But in most of the enterprises, you will have the networking team, you'll have the storage team, you'll have different teams, and those particular different teams would be playing different roles in place. So essentially, I am making a point to reuse existing resource groups, existing networking aspects and all. So that's the reason when you see this particular code, you will know that I'm using existing components. So first part is the resource group, which it's using. And as I said, this is not deploying, it's reusing the resource group. Next, it's creating the workspace. So what I'm doing is I'm using an existing resource group. However, I'm creating a workspace. And the next is I'm creating the Azure Virtual Desktop host pool. Now, this is where, as I said, I've seen a mixed bag. You could hard code this year, like I've seen people hard coding the values versus all I'm doing is I'm calling it in the variable files because we've all done all the declaration of what we wanted the name to be in the variable file. So you can simply call the variable file in here, and you're not hard coding the values. Whether the debate that we were talking, is it a validation environment, true or false? And in my desired state, I'm saying true, but depending on what you've entered, and then you can check the delta drift if someone goes in the UI and says no, it will have a drift after that. All the custom properties, whether it's Azure AD join, whether redirection, all the values. So this is a big part where I'm saying I'm enabling Azure AD, I'm enabling single sign-on. The last bit of what you're seeing, enable RDS AD authentication, is nothing but the single sign-on, which came in little later than the original release. Hence, these are all the RDB properties that I'm entering, and this tells the host pool whether USB redirection, printer redirection, and all those particular aspects are enabled or not. And I've put this is probably a great way of controlling what your host pools can do and cannot do. So you can disable it over here as well. Description, always put in descriptions. What is the type? As I said, you can start reusing the code. If you put in the effort once, you can start reusing. There's not much difference. As you can see, I've also put it in the box, whether pooled or personal, depending on what what switch are you using. Of course, we are doing remote apps, so it has to be pooled. But you see the point that it gives you the flexibility whether personal or pool, and you can leverage the block in another deployment. Maximum sessions allowed, 5, depth of the load balancer. So all the options that come in the UI are associated. And I've also tried to put the values against it. So I can start leveraging or reusing the code if I wanted to change if I wanted to do another host pool, and instead of doing depth first, I want to do breadth first. So I can change that code. So I put in the values as well. So this whole block is the creation of the virtual desktop Azure host pool. The next part is the app registration, which, as I said, to do the deployment, you need to create the app registration, and you need to put a future date from the deployment date, what you're doing. Then only it will allow you to do it. Create a remote application group. So this is, again, creation of the application group. Same, it's pulling out all the variables. I'm not, like, as I said, I'm not hard coding anything. And the big ticketed item is what type of a remote application group is this? Remote app, because I'm not giving out desktops, full-on desktops to pooled or personal desktop. I'm giving out remote apps to end users. Associated workspace. If you want to, now the next element is, once you've created the application, you need to associate that to the workspace. And this particular block is doing the association with the workspace. The assignment, as I said, now that you've done the application group, now you need to assign it to the Azure AD. And this particular block is doing the assignment. And the last block is the assign AAD group for the resource group for RBAC. So essentially, if you know, once you've done the deployment, if you want your users to log into the desktop, there is an assignment of the users or the group of users having virtual machine user role. They should be part of that particular role if they want to consume the Azure Virtual Desktop. So this particular block is doing that aspect for you as well. So you don't have to go and assign the role manually. It is assigning the virtual machine user role within Azure so that users can log into your remote apps from there. So this, in a nutshell, if any of you have deployed, and most of you, I'm sure, would have deployed a remote app, all the options in the UI are now into this particular configuration file, and you've declared values for what you want it to deploy. Output, not too fast output is essentially when we're going to deploy it, it's going to spit out what essentially at each phase it is doing. And essentially that output is just like verbose mode. It's telling you at every angle, it's now doing Azure Active Directory assignment. Now it's doing the region. Now it's doing the host pool creation. So you've put all of that structure in the output file. And let's now move into action. And first command first is we've gone through all the 4 files that were required. The next is the very first workflow item or the command in your workflow is the initialization. So this initialization is making sure that it has the Azure resource providers. And if the exe needs updating, it will go ahead and update it as well. The next is we will create, as I said, I don't usually do the validate, and you can tell again that I'm not doing it. And I'm going to leverage the plan that I've already done. That's the reason you were seeing all these files in my folder. So essentially now it's going and checking whether it can do all this creation. Remember, it's not creating right now at this point in time. It's just ensuring whatever you've put in the main and what you want Terraform to do is going and checking against it whether it can do. Now you can see it all here. This is important. Now, Terraform will perform the following actions. It is leveraging and doing this within the resource group of create, and it's going to create these particular tags. It's going to create the location is this, name of the host pool for the remote app is that. It's doing the role assignment, and it's also going to add the desktop virtualization so that users can log in after it's deployed. The assignment role for RBAC. This is the RBAC is above is the name, and the next one is showing you the GUID. Moving from there, it's showing you the remote desktop application group that it's going to create. This is the name and details of the application group, remote application group it's going to create. The next is the virtual desktop host pool. It is deploying the host pool with all the names. It has also extrapolated the variables and have given it names associated to it. It's given the values that we've declared in the main, like the maximum session allowed is 5. And it's done that it's going to do all of these configurations for you. And the time zone being Australia East. Depending on what you want, you can specify the time zone. And you can see the entire plan is coming through. And there's no errors if you, at this point in time, I've seen this being green most of the time, but when you do the apply, the next part is when you will get the error sometimes. So I hope today the demo gods are with us. So we've done the plan, and it's given us the outline of the entire plan. It's saying it can go ahead and do it. So the next is now we will apply the plan. This is when it starts doing the deployment in the background. Earlier, what you saw, it's just going and checking against and seeing and making sure that it's able to do the deployment. And now is when it is actually going into Azure and creating the host pool, the application group, the workspace, and doing all the assignments to it. And also assigning the Azure AD group to the application group. And lovely. Just when we wanted, brilliant. this is exactly what I wanted to show you guys, that remember the application registration piece that I was talking about earlier. And looks like it's complaining about the updating the registration token for the host pool. This host pool group name is this, host pool expiration time value must be between 1 hour and 30 days from now. So back to our variables. Lovely. Just when I thought it's going to go smooth, it did not. So we need to make sure the expiry value must be between 1 hour and 30 days from now. So definitely it's the time, because we are well within the 30-day period from now, but most likely the time is not. Let's get this time. What it's complaining is that I have to go ahead and put the time in this format, and it cannot be more than 1 hour from now, which I bet it is, because this is some. Okay, let's see if we can still do the apply. Ooh, lovely. So what did you learn out of this? Hey, Rash, you just cannot go and rerun it again. First, once again, rerun plan, because you made changes to the file. And first thing first is it has to go through a plan. The plan will update that particular setting of what you've updated in the variable.tf. So it's picked it up. Now we can do the apply. And again, happy days, demo, happy days. Expiration time. Let's take this value. Your hands up if you've undergone similar issue. Would love to see.
There's somebody in the chat who says it might be related to time rotation.
And use this AVD expiration time. Right. So it's time rotating. Okay. That's pretty cool as well. I'll definitely give it a go. Just give me a minute, but yeah, show of hands if someone has gone through this. No one? Oh, so is it just me, the lucky one out here? No, I've personally faced this issue multiple times, as in many times, honestly. Okay, let's see if this works out. Once again, plan as you made the changes. And then apply. And okay, now failure response status for this. Service return 400 activity ID. Expiration value must be between 1 hour and 30 days from now. So essentially, what I would want to show you guys is that I would love to show you what am I doing. And so let me share the UI for a minute so that everyone understands the context of what I'm doing. So essentially, whenever you want to do anything with session host, you need to have a registry or registration key. Now, so what I did is I came into an existing pool and I went ahead. No, this is, guess what? It's actually deployed. So if you notice, it's partially deployed right now because this is exactly the name of the remote app host pool that we are deploying. So it is actually deployed, but it's saying that it's missing a registration key. So that's the reason this is an important aspect. And it says use a registration key. So all you do is click on expiration date 30 days between 1 and 20. So let's say pick 25th again. And this is what your registration key is. And I don't want to download. Now, when I go and hit add, it'll allow me to add the host pool. So essentially, what we just did right now in the UI is exactly what the code is trying to do as well. It is just the matter of fact that we need to match the timing in a way that it picks it up. And oops, sorry, wrong screen.
There's another question asking if the variable.tf file has to be saved after changes.
I don't. VS Code has autosave, so luckily I don't. Okay, that's fine. Okay. The demagogues, we were with us glad that it's just not that bad. It worked. Luckily, I was like, come on, it can't be that bad. So as you can see, it's gone ahead, added, and you can see all the aspects that it went ahead and did with the apply. Now let's go. So this is done with the deployment. Now, what I would love to see is that I would love to show you back in the portal all the things that is deployed. See, our naming convention was A for apps and host pool. So it's there. Let's go and see the application group. It is there. One with this one, the RAG, remote application group, RAG is there. Workspace is there. AVD 01 workspace, so it did that. So essentially, as you can tell, that it's gone ahead and done the deployment, and it's created all of those particular aspects for you programmatically. And now it is inside the UI. Now, what I wanted to literally show you was the delta drift. Let's say I did this. I changed the value from the validation environment from yes to no. And now I'm clicking save. Back to stop sharing, share the VS Code part. Let's do a plan once again. So you can see that it did immediately detect the delta drift of the config change. And you can see that in ours was false, now it's true. Do you want to change it? And essentially, if I said apply, it will go and undo the change. So essentially, this is a great way to do config drift management for you. And the last aspect before we get into the questions is let's go ahead and destroy whatever we created. Now, as easy as the way it got created after the config files, as easy, it will go ahead and I've hit the destroy. It's going to destroy everything. I've done the plan. Now the next is apply. That's it. It's telling you that it's going to destroy, just for context, it's going to destroy the remote application group, the host pool, the workspace in the location, and the assignment that we did for Windows 365 AAD group. So that it's all taking into account and it will destroy it. And now it will go ahead and destroy the remote app. It's pretty quick. That's the beauty, that once you spend the time on creating the structure, files, config, leverage, reuse again and again with different configurations, and makes the whole seamless deployment and repeatable code again. And you can work with collaboration teams through GitHub. You can have someone who's the expert in your team being the person who approves people's code. And quick one before proof is in the pudding. Let's go back in here, refresh. Yep, now you can see the one with A-HP is gone. So that concludes the demo part. Back to the tech. Let's see what we have. Before we jump onto the questions, I have this entire series on my blog, askrh.com, which takes you through different aspects. All the code is in there. In fact, the latest blog post is about the scaling plan for host pools in the series. You can grab the code. Whatever I've shown you right now is on my blog post. Feel free to hit me up, and let's open it up for questions.